We thought it was a person. It wasn't standing like any person I'd ever seen. That line sat in my head for years, simple and wrong in ways I couldn't name when I was 16. I still hear the gravel under our shoes, the way the trains sighed in the distance, the low snap of the campfire like a heartbeat in the dark. 3 nights, 3 different places, 3 different kinds of fear. People around town started using words that come from older stories. Wendigo, Skinwalker. They were fill-ins, labels for the blank where sense should have been. I tell these 3 encounters the way I remember them, not as proof of monsters, but as the things that left witnesses, including me. We were bored and restless, the kind of bored that makes teenagers make bad choices. Alex and I slipped out past curfew, headlights disappearing behind hedges, hands stuffed into pockets to hide the chill. There was a known camp beneath the freight line where people who didn't want rooftops would build small fires and spend the night on pallets and blankets. Jerry, a man who sometimes traded stories for a cigarette, had been spotted there before. We weren't thinking about danger in the right way. We were thinking about the thrill of being somewhere we weren't supposed to be. The path to the tracks is a strip of gravel and scrub a block past the last streetlight, and that night the air held the smell of wet leaves and old smoke. The orange of the campfire was a small sun, a warm circle that felt like permission. We crept near the lip of the clearing, voices low, our breath clouding in the light. People were there, jackets huddled close, a pot breathing steam. Jerry's profile in the firelight looked like a bronze statue, bent, small gestures. We stood outside that glow like children watching a slow play. Then something moved at the edge of the light. Not a step, not the kind of shuffle you'd notice. It was a posture. A silhouette straight as a post, in a green jacket I remember seeing in every other stranger's memory. It didn't shuffle, it didn't fidget. It was a dark, vertical thing against the trees, and its stillness felt like an omission. Alex hissed a question I couldn't make sense of, and I remember my own voice thinning in the cold. It wasn't far, close enough that the way it held itself mattered. The shoulders were wrong, the head tilt was wrong. For a moment, breathless, we told ourselves it was someone standing on a root, someone taller than us, the light playing tricks. Then it started toward us. Not walking, not running. It closed distance like a shadow stretches at sunset, fast but without noise. No footfalls on gravel, no crunch of leaves. It was like someone had learned to move on the exact air around us and not touch the world. It covered ground in long, deliberate strides, smooth as oil. Alex grabbed my sleeve and mouthed, "Run." I remember the sound of our own footsteps, sudden, heavy, the way my lungs seemed to split into 2 parts, the part that ran and the part that cataloged details, the beanie it might have worn, the smell of damp wool, the faint metallic tang of the railroad. We burst onto the little wooden bridge that arches over a dry culvert beneath the tracks. The bridge boards vibrated under our shoes. The radio of a passing car flashed a beam that painted the trees in white. I had the clean, sharp terror of someone too young to process what might happen next. We didn't look back until we hit the other side. When we did, there was nothing there. No human silhouette, no sound. Only the way the campfire still glowed orange and a plume of steam rose like a sigh. We hid in my room for an hour with the curtains drawn. Alex insisted on checking the window every 3 minutes. We told each other what we'd seen in smaller words, slicing the fear into manageable pieces. We never went back to the tracks. We didn't tell my mom because how do you explain a thing that didn't move like a person? Later, the high school kids said it was a skinwalker, half joke, half superstition. Others whispered Wendigo,
a name they used when they wanted something ancient and hungry to stand in for what they couldn't name. We used those words to make sense, not because we believed in monsters, but because person felt like the wrong answer. There are details I return to when I try to examine that night. The way the creature, whether man or something else, held its head tilted like it was listening to a frequency we couldn't hear. The way it didn't make the dry leaves crack. We never learned if Jerry knew who it was. Months later, a man with a green jacket would walk past town, but nothing was ever proved. The not knowing hardened into a scar. If you like real, uncut scary stories, subscribe. We've got more that don't wrap things up neatly. Stay with me. The next two won't get easier. The night I drove into the cul-de-sac, the neighborhood looked like a movie set for grief. Ryan had called me around midnight with the kind of voice you can't fake. Rapid, breathless, fingers on glass sound. He told me to come. I didn't ask questions beyond the fastest ones that mattered. Which street? Which house? The run of houses there was the kind that reassures. Small lawns, trimmed hedges, mailboxes lined like obedient soldiers. Once you stand on it and see the porch lights, you forget the dark still exists. By the time I pulled up, police cruisers were stretched along the curve like a halo of low flashing light. The sun had been gone for hours, but the blue and red strobes gave everything a false twilight. Neighbors were clustered on lawns with blankets and tissue-wrapped hands. Someone held a folding chair. Ryan stood with his shoulders hunched, sheriff's tape fluttering across a maple tree near his house. Mrs. Klein's house sat just 2 doors down.
She was the kind of elderly neighbor who left leftover pies on stoops and whose laugh filled the cul-de-sac on holiday weekends. The front door had a semicircular window above it, a little architectural smile. That semicircle was a jagged puzzle now, glass ripped out like a wound. Through that hole you could see the foyer, the coat rack, the small hall runner. There was nothing theatrical, no curtains thrown aside in dramatic motion. The broken glass had an intent, quiet quality to it. Something had come through the upper portion of her door. It could have been the desperate strike of a man who had lost himself. It could have been something else. People forming theories in front of you has a way of making you feel smaller. What haunted everyone more than the broken glass was the demeanor. The intruder, whether human or not, had moved through Mrs. Klein's house with a deliberate, almost methodical quiet. Neighbors said he didn't scream. He didn't leave tracks that made sense for a frantic person. He didn't run afterward like on the news. According to Ryan, half his voice skipping, the man walked off. He exited into the night with a calm that didn't fit any ordinary human panic. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He treated the assault like a chore finished, a box checked. I tried to keep my voice level when describing what we were seeing. The police asked their questions in tones that come from training. Their flashlights swam across knickknacks and small frames on the hallway wall. There was no bloodlust on the lawn. There was stunned sleepwalking. Mrs. Klein was taken to a hospital where they fixed what needed fixing. She moved away after that, to a sister's house 3 towns over. We respected that choice. You don't argue with someone who chooses distance from the place where their sense of safety was stripped. Neighbors theorized. One man, shaking his head, said maybe it was a junkie looking for money. Another, an older woman who kept a Bible on her porch, tapped the 3 times of her voice and muttered something about dark spirits. The rumor mill is a way to survive not knowing. In our town, the phrases people used were a mix of frustration and myth. It moved like something else, someone said, meaning they could only explain that stillness and method with stories woven into the woods. That unwillingness to accept a simple explanation, an ordinary criminal who happened to be calm, made people grasp toward bigger things. Police had no immediate leads. No neighbor had seen the person arrive or leave. No CCTV captured a simple figure on film. The lack of evidence in a place that used to be quiet made the wound deeper. You can deal with a name. You can't deal with an absence. The image I kept replaying was the semicircular window, that cruel little smile of glass, now broken, like an invitation returned as a rebuke.
If something about that night feels mythic in memory,
If neighbors called it Skinwalker or used Wendigo as shorthand, it's because those labels are human-sized ways to handle inhuman calm. In the years after, we tried to explain it with reason. People proposed motives, mental states, drugs, wrong houses, but none of those came with satisfying closure. Mrs. Klein moved away. The person who did it was never caught in time. Sometimes, at night, the memory of him walking away, cool, measured, like the rest of us were incidental clutter, plays across my mind before sleep. I think of a creature that mimics human behavior as accurately as sorts copy handwriting. I also think of men who can turn off alarm and empathy like a light switch. Both possibilities make you lock the door more tightly. The third one is the one that sits deepest. People you thought you knew, then don't. When I was small, our town still smelled like pine sap and Sunday dinners. There was a family 2 houses down. Father worked nights, mother baked twice-batch pies, and a son who learned to laugh loud and mean well. He taught us little things kids teach each other: how to whittle a bit of wood into a spear for a cardboard sword, which creek had the best rocks to skip. He was the kind of boy you trust because he's been part of the neighborhood for as long as anyone remembers. My mother liked him, waved when he passed. When the kids talked, he was the one who could drive a stick into a campfire and tell you a ghost story without blinking. When he offered to take my older brothers and a few others camping, it felt normal. The motherly instinct in my own mom gave a flat no, the kind of refusal that brooks no debate. She didn't like the idea of kids camping unsupervised with someone who was barely 20. My brother sulked. I remember the way the son smiled and let it go, the way he promised they'd be careful without being asked. The world didn't feel dangerous then in the way it can later. Danger had a shape that belonged in movies and was not called by the same name you call your neighbor. Months later, at a campsite 20 miles away, something terrible happened. Detectives came through town asking questions. Word moved through our neighborhood like a chill. There had been a triple homicide at the site where campers had been. Detectives leaned into doorways and asked our parents if anyone could account for certain people. Rumors attached like burrs. People said detectives suspected the neighbor's son. Suspected is a word that sounds official and leaves rooms full of silence. No one wanted to say the name out loud. No one wanted the accusation to land on the porch where children had been taught how to throw a ball. Years later, he was arrested for an abduction in another town, and suddenly the old suspicions took on a shape. A detective, quiet, grave, someone my mother trusted, told her under a gray street lamp that they believed the same man was involved in the campground deaths. I don't know whether that detective had irrefutable proof or strong conjecture. I only know how small and brittle our neighborhood felt after that. The neighbor who once shared holiday pies had been suspected in the gravest of things. The near miss clings to me because of the choices that could have been different, because of my mother's unshakable refusal that kept me home that one night. It's a gratitude that tastes like ash. I think of the neighbor's son, of how he could have been 100 different people depending on which life he'd chosen, and how the community that raised him failed to see what's in him until it was too large to ignore. People in our town folded him into the old stories. Some would joke morbidly that he was the kind of man the old stories warned you about, invoking the Wendigo as a metaphor for someone who preyed on others. I tried to keep that at arm's length. It's easier to call someone a monster than to trace the ordinary ways cruelty grows. Those 3 nights, on the tracks, in the cul-de-sac, on the dirt roads of childhood, threaded together later, each had the same bruise, a gap in explanation, and the urge to fill it. We wanted closure. We wanted to name the thing so we could target it with lighting or law. Sometimes folklore does the heavy lifting. In our town, people leaned on these stories the way someone leans on a fence to hide the fact they're trembling. The more time passes, the stranger memory gets.
The brain becomes a copying machine that edits. I can recall tiny sensory elements with clarity. The smell of burning pine at the campfire, the dull metallic taste in my mouth when the bridge boards shook, the strobe of police lights scattering through thin autumn fog, the cool damp of my mother's hand when she said no. But other parts remain in smudges. Did the silhouette at the tracks tilt its head before it moved? Or did my mind invent that tilt to make sense of its silence? Did the intruder at Mrs. Klein's house pause at the foyer to look at family photos? Or did neighbors read behavior into an absence of panic? Did the neighbor's son have a look that should have read like a warning? Or did we want a look to fit the horror we later learned? I do not pretend to know. I do not have the kind of evidence that can be pinned to a board in a police department. When I say that people started saying skinwalker or wendigo, understand that those are shorthand, ways for people to process behavior that felt beyond everyday cruelty. The original cultures who told those stories meant them in specific contexts, and our use of the words was often clumsy, borrowing the language of old fears when new ones needed an outlet. I don't claim cultural authority. I only note that myth slipped its scarf around events that had no neat human explanation.
There is a weight to living with a mystery like this. The aftermath is not dramatic in the way movies make it. There are no final showdowns. There are small habits that take root instead. Checking the lock twice before you sleep, driving the long way home because it feels safer, nodding a little less readily to the neighbor who used to borrow your ladder. There are community meetings where people say things in carefully measured voices, and there are lonely people who stop answering calls because the world has shown itself to be unpredictable. In all of those, there is grief for what was taken, for the loss of a simpler trust. Sometimes I think about the reasons we want monsters. When something inexplicable happens, people recoil from the idea that ordinary explanations might be uglier. A man who can go through a house and walk away calm is harder to swallow than a mythical beast who obeys rules in stories. Saying skinwalker or wendigo gives an order to chaos. It allows us to frame acts as part of a narrative that at least feels complete. Real life, with its messy human cruelty, offers no clean ending. Folklore provides closure. That, perhaps, is the real power of these names. They are not evidence, they are a balm. I have replayed these nights not to scare you, but because the memory presses. Teenagers who once ran across a bridge with their mouths full of fear are now adults who check their children in at night. A woman who had glass burst above her door moved herself to safety because the universe allowed her that option. A neighborhood learned to look at familiar faces with a new reserve. None of these are glamorous changes. They are the slow recentering of a community around the knowledge that the line between ordinary life and danger can be thin and indistinct. Do you believe those things in the woods are something other than human? Maybe. I have hesitated to say either way because both options leave a bad taste. If they were people with intentions shaped by drugs or rage, there's accountability to be sought, lines to follow, a legal system that may or may not reach them. If they were creatures shaped by older stories, then the world is more complicated, bent under an older rule we don't have maps for. In the quiet times, I see the posture of the silhouette at the tracks and try to tell myself it was a person. I see the intruder at Mrs. Klein's door and want to think it was a criminal with a plan. I think of the neighbor's son and hope I have the humility to remember how often we mistake small trends for fate. There is also the lingering human effect, the way community trust gets rewired. People stop putting out recyclables in the evening. They keep porch lights burning. They teach their kids to walk in pairs. Those are sensible actions, but they come from a place of anxiety. They are a cultural fossil of that night, frozen behaviors you can trace back to an hour when something shifted. Do you believe those things in the woods are something other than human? Maybe. I have hesitated to say either way because both options leave a bad taste.
If they were people with intentions shaped by drugs or rage, there's accountability to be sought, lines to follow, a legal system that may or may not reach them. If they were creatures shaped by older stories, then the world is more complicated, bent under an older rule we don't have maps for. In the quiet times, I see the posture of the silhouette at the tracks and try to tell myself it was a person. I see the intruder at Mrs. Klein's door and want to think it was a criminal with a plan. I think of the neighbor's son and hope I have the humility to remember how often we mistake small trends for fate. There is also the lingering human effect, the way community trust gets rewired. People stop putting out recyclables in the evening. They keep porch lights burning. They teach their kids to walk in pairs. Those are sensible actions, but they come from a place of anxiety. They are a cultural fossil of that night, frozen behaviors you can trace back to an hour when something shifted.
I could tell you the best possible answers right now, pin the problem down with neat cause and effect, and help you sleep. The truth is messier. The witness voice, mine, Alex's, Ryan's, the neighbors, is full of doubt and small certainties. We know how we felt. We cannot always say why. Sometimes, the stories we tell ourselves are the only currency we have left to buy back a small measure of control. A few things about these stories deserve gentle emphasis because they are important and true. No one in my telling uses the words Wendigo or Skinwalker as proof. Those words came later as a way to frame a nameless threat. I use them only as people in my town did, as interpretive frames, not as claims. I avoid naming anyone who wasn't already named in the community whispers, because names are heavy and reputations are fragile. I do not intend to accuse. I intend to record how ordinary life sometimes fractures and what the fractures look like from the inside. I am still asked, years on, which one frightened me most. The tracks night gets the heart for the physical oddness of motion. The cul-de-sac is the one that turned daily normality into something that can be invaded without warning. The neighbor story is the one that taught me the most painful truth, that the scariest things are sometimes people hidden in everyday clothes, who smile and borrow sugar and are not caught until the harm is already done. If you have a story like this, if you've had a night where you saw something you couldn't explain, or if a neighbor you trusted turned out to be dangerous, tell it. Leave it in the comments. We are a strange species when it comes to discomfort. We either bury it or we share it in the hope that telling will lighten the load. I'm curious what people think. Were these things of the woods or men wearing the woods as a mask? Do you lean toward human explanations, mythic ones, or a mix of both? Before I go, one last thing. Whether you chalk these nights up to folklore or to human cruelty, the takeaway is not that the world is filled with monsters you can point at. It's that the line between the safe and the unsafe is not as thick as we like to believe. Lock your doors if it helps you sleep. Teach your kids to be wary when a grown-up asks them to go somewhere alone. Keep your eyes open, but try not to live only in fear. There is a life worth living outside of constant dread. I'll leave you with this. For years, whenever a truck rattled past on those tracks at 2 in the morning, I'd stand at my window and look at the black line of trees and wonder whether, under certain moons, something older was stepping out and testing the way our backs tensed. Whether it was Jerry's silhouette, a desperate man, a future criminal, or a name borrowed from myth, the world did not feel friendly in that sliver of time. I think that's what keeps witnesses shaken. Not the spectral certainty of monsters, but the memory of being small and exposed when the normal rules of safety pause and give way to an unknown. If this stirred something in you, leave your thoughts below. Tell us what you think, human or other. Share if you know a story like this. And if you want more accounts I've collected, subscribe and come back. For now, listen to the nights when they are quieter than usual. Sometimes you can hear the shape of the world rearrange itself, and that's not a sound anyone should get used to.